Good evening and welcome to the Marshall Lyon County Library for tonight's launch of James Zarzana's MARSCO Sustainability Project, the third book in the Marcio Saga. My name is Jan Loft and I'm very honored to be introducing Jim tonight for this launch. The format for this evening, Jim will be making some opening comments. Then you can ask some questions if you have any. Jim will then read his first excerpt from the book, the MARSCO Sustainability Project. He will offer you another opportunity for questions and answers, if you have some, and then Jim plans to read a second excerpt from the book. James Zarzana has lived in Marshall for 30 years. Jim is Emeritus Professor of English from Southwest Minnesota State University. Jim was a very involved member of the SMSU community. In addition to teaching a full credit load for the English department, Jim served as department chairperson and a wide variety of campus committees and task forces. Now, Jim will tell you that of all his many accomplishments at Southwest, he's most proud of the semester conversion. Now, at that time and to this day, many people do not realize what a huge endeavor that was. We often referred to him as the conversion czar, so he was Zarzana. Jim tips his hat to Drs. Pat Brace, Laren Barker, Paul Enerson, and the late Tim Wilder, and to Alan Gislason for all the work they put into completing this very huge project back in the mid-90s. Now here's my story. So I'm Dean of the College of Arts, Letters, and Science, and Jim comes to me and says, I'd like to investigate phased retirement. Now for those of you that don't know what phased retirement is, it works out great for people that don't want to plunge 100% into retirement. And for a period of time, they can have a reduced teaching load and they can have reduced responsibilities over this time. And so we worked out a 3-year phased retirement for Jim. Well, that lasted 1 year. After that first year, Jim came to me and said, you know what? I have to be a full-time writer. I'm a writer and that's what I need to do. So Jim is not retired, as Jim writes just about every day. So tonight we finally get to learn about book 3 in the MARSCO Saga, and he'll explain why I use that word finally, the MARSCO Sustainability Project. So please welcome to the podium author James Zarzana.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Jan, for telling the most embarrassing story you could tell about my career at Southwest. So yes, first off, thank you, Jan, for doing the intro tonight. You and many others have been so supportive. Come on in. Have been so supportive throughout the years. And I would also like to thank the Marshall Lyon County Library for hosting this, especially Paula and Michelle, and of course Emily Rose, who is staffing the camera tonight. And I do need to thank Marianne, my wife, also Elaine, our daughter, and our son-in-law Finn, and now our grandson Tornay. He'll figure in a bit. The MARSCO Saga, for those of you that love to read 19th century British lit, which was my specialty, you know right away when we say the keys to all mythologies what we're referring to, which was a book in a book that mentioned in a novel by George Eliot, and it was a book that was never written. It was just went on and on and on. In fact, the Anglican priest who was organizing, writing this, he'd go to Rome and study and everything, left it in his will that if his wife didn't finish it, she didn't get any money, and she didn't finish it. So the keys to all mythologies. And if you're a Brit Lit scholar, that's a funny story. Anyway, I can't tell you enough about how supportive Mary Ann is. Never once did she stand behind me as I was working and say, you could have painted the bathroom by now if you'd get off that damn book. And of course, Elaine last Christmas read pretty much the final copy book 3. She found a few things I needed to tweak, commas and that sort of thing. And she was very pregnant and was very emotional. She said, don't ever call it morning sickness. It's 24 hours a day and 4.5 months long. But she was, I was working and actually on book 4, and she was reading book 3, and she's crying, and she's going, geez, Dad, this is intense. And then I said, what chapter is it? So she explains the chapter, and I go, uh-oh. Then she's reading the next night, the next chapter. I go, yeah, geez, Dad, this is intense. I also want to thank Dana Yost, Karen Elton, and Cindy Votruba. If you saw the Marshall Independent on Saturday, it was a fine article and a placement and the graphics of all that article. And lastly, a short explanation to the dedication of the book. The book is dedicated first and foremost to the Lunch Bunch, who saved my career. I was adrift at Southwest, being dragged to the table of the union guys talking about in 1974 when this happened, and I got dragged over by Susan McLean, who's retired now, lives in Iowa City and Rome and Greece and all over the world. And so we talked about 30-something. When Jerry Tolan joined the table, he and I would secretly talk football, because college football. And then, of course, it grew and grew and grew. But Jan Loft, Doug Pilgrim, Pat Brace, Kathy Cowan, who unfortunately has passed away, Jerry and Mary Tolan, Mark Goodnow, Mark Foken, many of you are here tonight, Linda and John, Nelson, and others, so have to say that. There is a mention of Don Plefka in the dedication, who was a supportive reader of mine. His grandson married one of my nieces, and at one point he emailed me, hurry up with book 3, I don't want to die before it's out. And unfortunately he did pass away, had complications of diabetes, so I put a mention into him. And lastly, and I'm surprised she's not here, but it's all right, it's cold, Sandy Hoffbeck. I every night put up, or not every, but try to every night put up something on Facebook that's funny, and then something that's thoughtful. And I always ask, repeat that for me, because it always says brought to you by the MARSCO Saga. Sandy Hoffbeck every night reposts every one of the things that I put up, and she also emails me and says, where's book 3? Where's book 3? So book 3. So the first little, do you have any questions? Because I'm going to jump in and read a little passage from book 1. I mean from the beginning of book 3. You have to tie the books together. Book 3 is 55 years later than the end of book 2. And so I did put in a little prologue that's actually about 25 years after the end of book 2, and so it's a little tie-in piece. It's very short, it's 6 or 7 pages, and it gives you a picture then of how, kind of rounds off how book 2 ended, and then sets up what's going on in book 3. I'm just assuming you've all read book 1 and 2, so I'll let you know Tessa is the daughter of Walter Miller. He's in cryogenics at this point in the book, so he doesn't really come in. Her husband is Grisati, and he is the one who designed the system that allowed them to be asleep for years and years, safely, years and years and years at a time. Also, there is a pilot, and her name is Shanghai. Of course, it's a euphemism, and that all comes out in 1, 2, and 3 as to why she needs a kind of a slang name and why that's significant. And they're on board the Cirrus Odyssey 2, which was a ship that they basically stole and are trying to get away from the Earth. And they realize at this point that no, in fact, they are heading back to Earth. They're all safe, but they're heading back to Earth. So here's the end of that little 6-page section. Shanghai looked out a view panel. Amid the range of stars by the thousands, around one star, the sun, their home orbited. What waited them there? What was it going to be like arriving back after 55 years away? What had happened during their hiatus? She'd be home soon enough to find out. Before their talk, the engineer, that would be Tessa, had been sick once more. She cleaned up after each episode over the past 5 days while the crew was awake. No one had much privacy. The pilot and Zot had to know Tessa was often sick. Mei Ling, you don't have to give away anything, the engineer began tentatively. They both knew the pilot had a hidden life, a pre-von Braun Center life. She needn't go there. But as a shuttle pilot, when you hiberned, you must have hiberned often. Did you know any woman, any passenger or crew member who went under while pregnant? Knew a few, and yes, Iceman reads you the riot act about being pregnant and not reporting it. But actually, mother and child were quite safe, especially with a top Iceman. That'd be Zot, certainly. But no one asked that question, the pilot smiled, without some suspicion. She noticed how drawn Tessa looked, tired even though she seemed to sleep a good deal in these past few days, and her intermittent vomiting. That had Zot and Shanghai worried, some type of hyper sickness, Zot imagined. Shanghai had suspected this, a woman would, but Tessa's husband had been too preoccupied. Are you sure? It can't be, not definitely. No way to check. Who thought to bring anything like a test kit for that on an interstellar escape? Shanghai reached out to hug Tessa. If Walter treats you like a daughter, treats me like a daughter, then we're sisters, right? Tessa began sobbing quietly. I know I'm not myself. I bark at Zot, then I coo to him. I want to tell him, but I'm so afraid he'll be furious and he'll do something while I'm iced, thinking I'd be better without a stowaway. My God, Tess, that's total asinine bullshit. He loves you. He would never do anything like that, never hurt his own child or you. When do you plan to tell him? Not sure. I'm afraid he won't let me ice if I do, she whimpered, uncharacteristic of her usual confident self. And then he'll ice and leave me awake, and I'll be old when he reawakens, and I'll have this 20-something stranger, his child. Well, let's see. Vomiting, sleeping beyond normal parameters, raging hormones making you utterly and completely irrational. Don't think we need a medical test, do we? Tessa wept. Mei Ling rocked her. Tess, I promise you'll be fine. It's natural. You'll be fine. The two women held each other, their black and auburn hair tumbling down over their shoulders. Shanghai whispered, Zot'll be beside himself with joy. He's the tops, and you'll be fine under his ice, the both of you, I promise. So that's a little tie-in piece to kind of explain where we're at the beginning of the book. And so that's the first little thing that I want. But I do want to give you a chance if you have any questions you want to ask me that aren't spoilers or comments or statements. I did not, by the way, arrange the weather, so I have to again thank you. It reminds me of one of the World War I talks that I did in a blizzard. You know, so it's like Marshall Weather and we just kind of arrange these sad tales of weather and when I want to do something. So, questions, comments? Dare I ask? Yes, sir. This is James, right? You're
yes.
James, yeah.
Nice to meet you, James.
Yeah.
So, I'm not especially familiar with the series, but I'm curious. Am I correct to understand that this is something of a prequel, and then the other two are sequential in nature?
The three books that are out are sequential in nature. The MARSCO Dissident starts the series, MARSCO Triumphant, then the release that I'm doing tonight, the Sustainability Project, MARSCO Sustainability Project.
Oh, okay.
Those three kind of complete the story. Then there is a fourth book. It is written. It is in a very advanced stage of a draft, but it is done. And it will be a prequel. And throughout the first three books, the book is mentioned. Walter Miller, who's asleep in the passage, in cryogenic stasis, he apparently has collected bits and pieces. People have sent him information when they found out he was doing this. He's the MARSCO dissident in the first book. And so he has just come into owning all of these statements about the world from when MARSCO was just a gigantic corporation, computer and everything, space exploration, and it eventually ends up running the Earth. So it's a story, he calls it the ascendancy of MARSCO, and it's mentioned throughout book 1, 2, and 3. It actually has a pivotal role in book 3. You know, I think it's pretty obvious. I have my PhD in English Lit, so the books are really interwoven. These aren't accidental creatures. So the fourth book, it's actually the third one I wrote, and it will be published fourth. And I'm not going to give you any idea of a publication date because I did that. This was supposed to be released for Christmas of 2017, and you see where we're at. And there weren't enough blizzards in 2017 to release it, so the weather was too good. So book 4 will be the prequel. Yeah. That's a nice question, though. And just to say one more thing about, because I was going to say it later anyway, but it's a good segue. It's purposely broken bits, it's pieces. There's a suicide note. There's a fake documentary, the script of a fake documentary. There's statements by big executives in MARSCO kind of whitewashing the whole thing. There's an interview with the last president of the United States. Then, there's all the soldiers that are in the wars that brings MARSCO to power. So it's all these, and Miller apparently all he did was line them up chronologically. The first 3 books look like, say, Harry Potter or any book that just traces through and gives you day 1, day 2, day 3. And book 4 is purposely bits, pieces, impressions, and fragmented. So, okay. Other Mark, you got a question? Oh, Jan's got a, yeah.
Well, I recently heard from someone who just finished book 3 and having read the first 2, finds it amazing that it was not your intent to have some of your storylines almost mirror the news.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't have done that when you wrote this book,
I started it in '97, yeah.
You couldn't have known.
Yeah.
And yet, it's kind of freaky how it follows the news.
I didn't write it as a how-to book, but yeah, it kind of startles me once in a while. I just exaggerated what was going on in '97 when I started. This book I started in 2000, wrote the draft in the summer of 2007, but even then, it was the end of the Bush era. We weren't even sure that Obama was going to run. He may have thrown his hat in the ring, but it looked like he wouldn't be the nominee. So yeah, it is what it is, but yeah. Anyway, did you, Pat, you say?
Yeah, a lot of the classic sci-fi uses the cryo-sleep rather than warp speed as a way to get people across long distances. Any of them an inspiration for the way you approach them?
Well, I think since it is set on Earth, pretty much, and it is in the end of the, what century? 21st. So it's starts in 2092. That's our century, so 21st. And it goes into the 22nd century. And also because MARSCO puts a clamp on scientific advancement. I didn't want to go toward a warp speed sort of thing. And I knew all along that I wanted that trip to be really, really long. And so that's why the escape ship does not reach light speed, and they need to be in cryogenic stasis. So that's kind of maybe we'll write another sci-fi series where there is warp speed and everything. And
Cryosleep gives the chance for creepy things to happen.
the Alien movies, they're all creepy things. Well, they're awake when they happen, but yeah. There aren't any space aliens or anything like that, but creepy things do happen. Other questions? Okay, so yes, sir, James.
You mentioned 97.
Right.
Would that be about the time when Newt Gingrich is doing some shenanigans as Speaker of the House?
No, this is 2097.
No.
When I started.
You were writing your novel, right? Did that have anything to do with it?
Yeah, this is a closed water. This was my open water. I don't, there were so many things going on, it's kind of hard to know.
So, the Clinton-
9/11 hadn't hit yet, so.
Had the impeachment begun of Clinton?
Frankly, I don't know.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
As you did this book, of course, events have accelerated. We moved from a situation where a mega corporation could control the world to a 1914 kind of a disintegration into extreme nationalism.
Right.
And that's happened so recently.
Yep.
We're no longer a flat Earth. Is that reflected in
Book 4, I've had to, adjust some things. Yes, I've had to add some things. And at one point, the most villainous politician in Book 4 was modeled on Jesse Ventura. He's had to be adjusted, shall we say. I don't want to give away too much about Book 4, but things on the cover of Book 1, you see the hand with the finger discs. That is a technology that really does exist. You can have a microchip inserted in your pet. There are businesses in Europe that are insisting that their employees have this microchip inserted so that they know when they are on the property. I think they're talking about possibly doing it for soldiers to keep their medical records, and unfortunately it's probably also to identify remains. So a lot of the technology has caught up. Hibernation as a 6-month hibernation, which is what it is in the book, and then there's cryogenic stasis where you can go 100 years, 200 years. Hibernation apparently is something that they really think they can achieve, and whether they would use it for space flight, I presume, or they put sometimes people purposely, they put them in a coma medically because they need to do, and it might be that they put them into hibernation. So that apparently is possible, and I really tried to make the science possible and doable. There isn't really too much, like I don't have Beam Me Up, Scotty, and Warp Speed, because all the science is practically doable. And Dana pointed this out in his essay that came out Saturday. The corporations are spying on us more than, I have it in the book, and it's just kind of vague and everything, but I mean, they know more about us than we really want to know that they know about us, and it's frightening, this idea of every corporation is a benevolent, good for the citizens and good for the earth. I don't think that's the case. And so I didn't invent it and I didn't write it down. I just wrote and it caught up with it. But other questions? So yes, sir.
Does your book has like digital copy? Is there online?
Yes, you can buy it through Amazon and load it onto any Kindle-ready, either an actual Kindle, which is what Amazon sells, but if you have the right application, I have a brother that read it off his iPhone because he had a Kindle download, whatever, and I don't know why you'd want to read it on a phone, a little tiny screen, but you can, get a digital copy. And unfortunately, you can get pirated digital copy. I don't know about book 3 yet, but and the one guy I caught recently is Russian, and he has not taken it off his website. So if you want a Russian troll to, you can, but please pay the author. He's a good guy. He needs the money. So okay, let me go on to the second passage. So we do have, as in the first passage suggests, Tessa's coming back, Zot, her husband, they have a stowaway. Then also her father and Shanghai, who are 4 significant characters from book 1 and book 2, and they will end up back on the Earth. And then I had to introduce some new characters. And so one of the central new characters I introduced is a young woman. This is the one that on my first rough draft, she started out at 18, then she was 20, and then she was 22, all in the same chapter that happened in one afternoon. I go, you know, I really should make her. So she's about 22 when this is taking place. Then there's a young man, Kyle Truman Roncalli, and for those of you that are really paid attention to book 1 and 2, the name Truman should jump out at you because there are characters in book 1 and 2 named Truman, or I guess just book 1. But anyway, book 1, yeah, anyway. They're in the earlier books. And he's the grandson of, grandnephew of some of those people. And then those two people, and then kind of tertiary people, are they're at a neighbor's a party, an outdoor party in the summer, and there's grandparents, elderly grandparents who are going to start to tell the story, and they are grandparents of two women who don't enter the passage, but they're mentioned, Hyacinth and her older sister Patrice. Hyacinth sometimes gets called Hi, and they're Richardsons, okay? So there's this outdoor party going on, and Sarah and Kyle are going to talk with these two grandparent people. Sarah rose and brought Kyle back to her table and then helped the waiting elderly pair relax and speak openly to the associates, something they would never do on their own. So Kyle's in MARSCO, Sarah isn't, and the grandparents aren't. Sure, Truman's lived out this away long time ago, Grandfather Richardson began hesitantly. I knew some, but I was just a boy. It was before those damn rioting prims chased off so many, some away for good. My folks fled to Sac City, but it was half burned down in those troubles too, by those damn prim bastards. His wife gave the obligatory shush. Ignoring her, he added, 3 or 4 years later it was before we returned to pick up pieces. Truman's, though, not sure where they fled off to or why they never came back. Theirs was one grange totally tore up and burnt down. Herd killed off or scattered. They was dairymen mostly. Well, there was that one Truman didn't escape, grandmother explained. Oh yeah, nearly forgot him. One was killed at a grange. Why? The grandfather turned to Sarah. Why, it was your grange, honey. What's become New Grange? I remember now, killed there and buried there too, by a damned associate later that same day. Strange times, them. Sarah had never heard any of this before. Sitting by the old man to listen, Kyle was amazed at the Indy story. This Granger's entire life had been spent working this land, resettling it, salvaging it from the rubble left after the sea wars and later the mutiny. By the strength of prim and Indy hand labor, each parcel had become a flourishing grange. I had a sense of this, Mr. Richardson, Kyle answered. My searching and old reports and posts tell the same, but without any names. And my own granddad, he's a retired associate living on the Serengeti. He told me stories. What's his name? Aaron Truman. Knowed an Aaron Truman, nearly 60 years ago. Bit older than me, as I recall, left the area long ago. Never heard of him since. Had a brother more interested in the Grange and their dairy herd. He's the one what loved animals. That younger man, was he Jeremy Truman, do you think? Could be. Could be. The old man looked up at the associate. Say, you know a lot about our lands. Trumans are part of my history, that's all. The grandmother unexpectedly caught her husband's attention. But that young man didn't die in the mutiny. Not the real one. The one that done so much damage and spread up to Sac City. He was dead long. He was long dead and buried before that. Say, dear, you're right. Grandfather scratched his head. Damnedest part. The only Granges destroyed that one day at first was New Grange. But it wasn't that name back then. And that Truman Dairy Place, too, and maybe one or two other spreads, too, tops. Newgrange belonged to a real character. What was his name? You mean that Miller feller? The grandmother interjected. I was too young to know, really, but he was talked about for years and years after, an associate, hiding out down here, so they say. Yeah, it was like he was the real target. So the stories go, but he'd skedaddled already, died in space, so they say. Kyle grew excited at all this information. Sarah sensed he knew only bits of this larger explanation, but now he was getting confirmation of what he only suspected. Pieces were falling into place for him, and some of them were connected to her. You know, geez, I haven't thought of the Trumans in years. The older brother did come back once, several months after the troubles had stopped. He was in security then, that I know. Can't hide that uniform, no how. He eyed the two recently arrived troopers, one still commanding his granddaughter's attention, different uniforms being in khaki, but clearly security personnel. He drank his lemonade, so as concerned as his son, Patrice's father, that she was speaking so long to that dark prim. And it was after the real mutiny he come back, the old man went on. We was here restarting because the real mutiny tore up all these places. That younger Truman boy died pretty much alone, except with some dogs. That was what was the Miller character spread. Nice spread even then. Few other Granges touched, but a few other Granges torched, like his pa's dairy place out by Tilson spread now, but more like they were searching Miller's place particular. All just in that one day. Only then, months and months later, the real whopping mutiny cut a long swath of fire and killing, lasted nearly 3 years off and on. Happy to see security then, the grandmother added. We was lucky to escape, the old man returned to repeat part of his own story, his mind drifting. Just around here at first, then later all hell broke loose, something fierce. And the Truman in security? Oh, yes, grandfather refocused and continued. He came with a squad of troopers to search for his brother's grave, if there was one. The old man turned to Sarah, who'd been hanging on his every word in stunned silence. He found the boy, nicely and properly buried, near what would be your main house, in those fine gardens of your mother's, Sarah. Used to be a cistern there, but he was there in the remains of the gardens, right where Miller's house stood, or the burned-down remains of it. What happened next, Kyle asked. Reburied him, I'm sure, probably on the property. And them dogs, the grandmother added. Oh yeah, damnedest thing. That boy was found with his brother. That boy was found by his brother, not buried alone, but with 2 dogs with him. So the brother kept them buried all together. This was at Newgrange, and the nice gardens are what remained of them. Moved later on, I think. Sarah should have said something to Kyle before. She should have taken him aside to speak with Celine, her mother. Her mother must know some of this, but Sarah had decided not to like Kyle, not to answer any of his questions or give him any assistance. She felt a fool. An old grave did lie in the family cemetery with no name. Her deceased ancestors had been placed there next to it because that single unknown grave had already rested so peacefully on that spot. And it was rumored that the body of a boy lay there with 2 dogs. But maybe she had it wrong. Maybe this boy and the dogs came later. Even so, I should have told him, she chastised herself. So there's a mystery about Kyle. He shows up at Newgrange. That's Sarah's father's beautiful spread. It's the nicest one out there. And of course, she just can't stand him. And you know how that goes. And so anyway, always right tension. And so we've got this tension between these young people and then the history of the Grange And all of this taking place at a time when MARSCO has promised to allow countries to restart. Sarah's father is on the transitional government that's trying to restart this a real elected body. And so he's up in Sac City trying to conduct political business. And then, you know, you have this world teetering on, you know, which way is it going to go. So I don't want to give you too much more than that, because then you won't need to buy and read the book. So that's the reason that I'm here. So, yes?
So as you create people, how do you choose their name? I mean, you have a Tessa, you have Walter, you have Millers, you have Richardsons, you have an Aaron, you have a Sarah, you have a Kyle. Why those names? How do you
Okay,
choose their
well,
names?
a lot of the people who are prim background, I use locations, because just like all the Smiths in the world and people like that, when their ancestors were serfs, they were often named after their occupation. So I have a character in here whose last name is Cleveland, and there's Shanghai, whose ancestry you know, is from the Chinese city of Shanghai. So that's that. A person like Truman, I did want that resonant with a true man. I didn't want you to think of the president, but they are true kind of men in a kind of a positive sense. I do have to say, Zot Grizzati and Roncalli, Kyle Truman Roncalli, are Italian-American names. I like writing books where Italian-Americans are not gangsters, so I do that on purpose. But as far as the other names, sometimes they have some significance and sometimes they don't. There is a character, if you know your Dickens and you know Bleak House, there's a house, a grand house in Dickens' Bleak House called Chesney Wold. And Chesney Wold has a ghost walk, and it's just empty. I mean, there's a rich family that lives there. They have no children, and the story revolves around a mystery of Lady Deadlock. The family that lives there is called the Deadlocks. Well, I use the name Chesney because it sounds like Cheney, and there's a connection to Dick Cheney. And so some of the names people have to kind of ferret out, and some are just, Sarah, I don't know. Brunel is a famous engineer, and the family name is Brunel, and her father was an engineer before he became this. So there's a kind of a connection there. And some are just names. Why I chose Sarah, it just seemed to fit her. So I don't know. I hope that answered. Tessa? I wanted a more modern sounding name, something like people might use today, and I wanted a distinctive name. And so it just, you know, Tessa came. I had one student, I think, in all my teaching career named Tessa. You know, Sarah's I've had a lot. So I can't use the name Mary Ann. I can't use the name Murphy. You know, I'm kind of limited on that. Zarzana would stand out. So, yeah. It's fun coming up with the right name, you know. And I do have a kind of a draft of something I'm working on. I will work on it sooner or later, and I can't come up with the right name for the male character.
Have you ever changed a name after a while? You
Yeah,
thought,
yeah.
oh, no, that person's
That doesn't
not
work.
wrong.
Yeah,
They're
yeah. I can't think of a quick example, but I have. Yeah, and characters will tell you a lot. Zot was going to start out as a 12-year-old boy. He said none of that. You know, I'm not going to take that. You know, you don't need to know what I was like when you don't want to know what a boy was like at 12. And Zot starts out as a man, and so yeah, they're bossy. So, good question. Any other? Pat, you always look like you're ready to ask a question.
Well, just Kyle and Sarah are the two main characters in the Terminator movie.
Are they? I didn't know. I never watched it. I don't watch.
Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't know that. Somebody's going to write, and he stole that from. Well, okay. Kyle is I have a nephew, Kyle. So yeah.
book series has been several decades in the making, and you've been able to watch contemporary technology evolve and change while you've been working
Right.
on these novels. Has contemporary technology's pathway influenced some of the ways that you've chosen to depict that evolution in the book?
Well, I've been corrected by my copy editor because I mentioned gigabytes at one time, and she has this business of editing, and then her husband is in the computer industry, and I guess they have the equivalent like a mainframe in their house, and she said, we have tetrabytes or something in our basement storage. She goes, don't say gigabytes. Nobody, it's way beyond that. So I just say bytes and bytes now. I mean, because I can't keep up with it. And then I kept talking about people having laptops, and she said, no, nobody. Well, I use a laptop. Yeah, well, So yeah, I mean, some of it, and then so I've gone to being a little more vague about the technology because I just can't keep up. I'm not a computer guy, and the stuff is just over the map as to what it can do. But yeah, so both the politics and the computers, the scientific stuff really have gotten beyond me. So it's dated already in that sense, but it happens. 1984 was dated, but people still read it, so I hope people are still going to read this. So. And there are probably some mistakes in there, so it happens. Other questions, hang-ups, problems, things I can answer? You must have a question. I'm looking right at you. Well, if you want to buy a book, the first copy of whichever one you want will be $20. Anything you buy after that will be $15. And I can take cash, checks, and if I can get it working, I've got a Square if you want to do a zip, but I'm not absolutely positive I can get the Square working. I had it working the other day, but you never know with technology what's going to happen. But I'd be very happy to sign some books, and of course I can answer other questions as you come up to.
Would you say all three of them are available on Kindle now?
All three are available on Kindle. And I have to say the Kindle price for this book is I think it's $5.99. I used to buy, Kindles used to be $1.99, $2, whatever, and now they're almost the same cost as a paperback. And I just, the heck with it, I'm going to raise the price. I'm sorry to be that way, and I shouldn't do that on tape, but yeah.
I'm just going to ask what a lot of people ask you who like Audible.
Yeah, okay, it's not on Audible. Everything I do, I'm self-published, and that means I pay to have it done. And I have learned through Phyllis Cold Eye that it is possible to have somebody speculate on Audible, but the books are so long. I would have to do MARSCO Part 1, Part 1A. So it would have to be 6 Audibles rather than 3, and so Marianne wants me to look into that. So I might. So, yes.
So I brought my number 3 to get my third signed
Okay.
copy.
Yep.
So I'm wondering when 4 comes out, how will I get your signature?
Well, anyone can message me through my Facebook or email or whatever, and we can arrange. It's $25 if somebody wants a signed copy. That covers postage and everything, and then they send me an address. I actually do send them the book off before I get the check. That shows you how trusting I am. And so far, no one has. But yeah, I have a cousin in California that still owes me. It's a cousin, and he still owes me $25. But I'm sure he'll pay me. And my brother. So yes, we'll be able to do it. And I don't know if the library invites me back for book 4. Maybe I'll do a launch. Not a launch. I won't do a launch, and I will do it like in April when the weather. Then we don't have to worry about tornadoes. But I certainly won't do it in the winter, but.
Can I put in a plug?
Oh, sure.
February 8th.
Oh, yeah, I was going to suggest that, yeah. Plug away.
I would like to mention that the Marshall Area Fine Arts Council, this is a save the date thing. The Marshall Area Fine Arts Council plans to host a fine arts farewell on Saturday, February 8th. That's our first choice. Smart Minnesotans, we do have a snow date that I hope we do not have to use, but that would be the next Saturday, February 15th. And we kind of narrowed down the times this afternoon. I hope this works for you too, from 1 until 4. And what we'd like to do that afternoon is have all kinds of people come to the Marshall Area Fine Arts Council. Jim will do some reading from book number 3, and Mary Ann will do readings from whatever she chooses to read from. And I even threw into the save the date that maybe she'd take requests, you never know. And other authors, other writers are also very welcome that day to share some of their writings. I'm thinking of it as a salon. I have a salon. But anyway, that's on Saturday, February 8th from 1 until 4, a fine arts farewell to 2 very fine members of our community. First time Jim read that in the Save the Date, he goes, oh, what 2 people are going to be there that afternoon? always the joke. So anyway, I hope you'll all mark your calendars for Saturday, February 8th for our farewell. Thanks.
Well, thank you all for coming and being interested and whatnot. And yeah.